Atari, Video Network, Stand Clear, Director,
Hi, welcome to another Retronaut video. So in the previous video we looked at the Binatone Master System, and this was a Hong clone system produced by I think it was a Hong Kong manufacturer, and I bought that in 1977. And the Binatone Master System, it was a frenzy at first, but after maybe 2 years or so, tennis and its other games were starting to wane in their novelty. There's only so many times you can bat a ball back and forth between your friends. Eventually it does start to get a little bit boring. Around the same time as the Binatone was bought by myself, the Atari VCS was released in the USA. This is the machine that you can see here. I just wasn't aware of it at the time. Now, in those days, it used to take a while for machines from the USA to be released in the UK. So once it got here, the price was pretty high for us over here. The economy wasn't doing very well, so I think we couldn't really afford it when it was initially released. But by 1979, when I was visiting my town centre, I would spend many hours in Woolworths there, goggling through a plate glass cabinet at their home entertainment systems. In there was an Atari VCS, and next to it there was a ColecoVision. They sat nestled together, and each of them had a very colourful bevy of game boxes around them, joysticks, paddles and things like that. Really looked very, very cool. I was basically like a dog looking at a chicken roasting on a spit. And I'm pretty sure some of the staff must have noticed my frequent appointments in front of the case, where I sort of stood with my eyes on stalks. Sadly, my funds couldn't really stretch to either of these machines at the time, so for now, my eyes had to stay on the end of stalks. And as you can imagine, after a while, that really began to ache. So the VCS, it had been in the stores for a couple of years by that point, so there was a market developing for second-hand units. And these usually came with the controllers that came with the console, unless they were broken. And very often they had a smattering of cartridges as well. By now, I was actually getting some pocket money each week. And I also did, as I remember, some odd jobs as well, although that may be a false memory. So by mid-1980, I think I had about £120 saved up, so I could buy a second-hand Atari VCS. So I was obviously very excited about this. That was about the going rate at the time, as far as I can remember. I could have paid less, but I really wanted to make sure I had some cartridges in any bundle that I bought. So I had to pay a little bit more for that. So a few months later, in the autumn, as I recall, I got a VCS. It didn't have the box. It did have the manual, and it also had the joysticks, and I think it had the paddles as well. And I think it had a small collection of games. I was absolutely chuffed. Of course, at first, I played a lot, going through the cartridges that actually came with it. But after a while, I mainly played it on the weekends. And the reason for this was I could actually hire out the cartridges from a local store. So in those days, renting media was really a common thing. There was an explosion of video rental stores, and they actually rented out the latest movies on videotape. The reason why they did this was that nobody could actually afford to buy the videotapes themselves of the movies, right? They were just too expensive. So what they did was they actually hired out the films and then watched them at home. Near where my mother lived, the owner of a shop, I think it was called Waves. I think it was a hairdresser, but anyway, by this point, they were actually renting out videos. And somebody at Waves had the bright idea of doing the same thing with Atari cartridges. So a short trip to Waves each Saturday gave me access to a large library of games at a much lower cost than actually buying them myself. I think they cost, I think it was something like £1 to hire for a weekend, which was pretty good value. And to give you an idea, I think a game at the time would have cost about £20, maybe more. So the next year and a half were great fun as I made my way through the catalogue of games at Waves. But I was now aware of more and more microcomputers that were being released. I was making trips again to that cabinet in Woolworths, where I first saw the Atari VCS and the ColecoVision. But now it was displaying microcomputers, such as the Atari 400, the Atari 800, and the TI 99. So that's the Atari 400 and that's the Atari 800. So yeah, they look very, very cool in that case. And again, sadly, these computers were out of my reach. They look really, really cool, but I just couldn't afford them. I was a creative type in school. I was talented in art and I had a lot of sort of art-based hobbies. And by this point, I really wanted to make my own games. I'm not saying I could make my own games, but that was where I was moving. I didn't want to just play them anymore. So the obvious next step for me, I felt, was my own computer. So I started planning on trading up my Atari VCS to get one of these new machines. And that would take a while, but in the meantime, I still had my Atari VCS. So let's have a look at this console. Generally, when you got it, it had 2 joysticks. This joystick actually is about as iconic as you can get. Back in the day, this often was used as the image to represent gaming. Yeah, I mean, everybody and their auntie had a VCS back in the 1970s. There really wasn't any other console around. I mean, there was the ColecoVision, but it just wasn't anywhere like as successful as the Atari. The Atari had a lot of games. Many of them were really good. Many of them were pretty awful. They had a very tight production schedule and sometimes the games were basically rushed. But they had some pretty decent versions of some of the arcade games. And that's important to mention as well. Back in the late 1970s, the arcade games were really, really the standard that everybody wanted to play. But obviously nobody could afford to have them in their home unless you're a millionaire. So that's where the Atari came in. Obviously it had cartridges, which was the big innovation over the Binatone machine. Actually, the machine itself, the VCS, has almost no RAM in it whatsoever. It's got a few bytes in it, I think. Pretty much everything was actually done on the cartridge. And that's what's pretty amazing about it. The build quality is actually pretty decent. I bought this one a few years ago. It's in very fragile condition. The plastic on it is really perished and it's very, very brittle. So opening it up and closing it is it's quite a scary thing. It has these controls on it, very similar to the Binatone, to choose different options, power, TV, type, and so on and so forth. And yeah, I mean, it was a great machine. It was the video game machine for the late 1970s and early 80s. But that's before really the microcomputer kind of took over that mantle. The reason why that happened was, as I said earlier, unfortunately, Atari did get into the practice of actually rushing cartridges to the market. In a couple of occasions, this actually caused very, very poor games to go to market, and people kind of got burnt out with it by about 1983. And that was when the whole Atari console market just had a massive crash, and yeah, nobody wanted to buy their games anymore. Luckily, I was out of the console market by that point, so I didn't really notice it. But yeah, apparently it was a pretty severe thing in the USA. So yeah, that is the Atari VCS. Again, you know, the paddles for the Pong games, showing its heritage. A wonderful machine, sadly hampered by some slightly shoddy, well, basically rushed game development. It turns out that given the luxury of time, people have actually been able to produce games on this machine, which are actually really surprisingly good. It wasn't actually as limited as it appeared to be at the time. It was just the fact that people were trying to knock out games, you know, sometimes literally in a matter of weeks or a couple of months. So yeah, actually, oh yeah, I must mention the wood. This is actually the Woody model, known with this name because it's actually got the wood effect on the front. Why does it have wood on the front? Well, because in the 1970s, there was an absolute fever for putting wood on almost everything. I don't really understand why. Maybe it was some kind of harkening back to our authenticity, you know, a reaction against plastics and this feeling that maybe we'd strayed away from the right path and we had to go back to more traditional materials. But basically it became a massive fashion. You would see US cars and British cars with wood effect on them. Everybody's houses was wood paneling. And yeah, it was a big thing. So that's why you have this wood effect on the Atari VCS. It's a little bit odd, but there we are. That was the industrial design fashion in the 1970s. In the next video, we're going to look at my first microcomputer, which was the Dragon 32. And I've got to say that was a fantastic machine. Sadly, my journey with it was truncated by issues outside of my control, but we'll look at that in the next video. Hope you enjoyed this video, and you know what to do if you did. Please click the like button and also the subscribe button. And I hope to see you in the next video.